to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Occasionally, a client will tell me that their estranged adult child has accused them, the parent, of gaslighting the child. And quite often, the parent doesn't know exactly what this means, let alone whether she's actually doing that, and if so, what to do to make sure it doesn't keep happening. So on today's show, I'm going to define the term gaslighting. I'll discuss its implications and talk a little bit about what you might do if you discover that you've been unintentionally guilty of this common practice with your child. It's a relatively simple fix, but you have to know what happened and how it happened in order to fix it. Gaslighting means intentionally making someone question their own perception of reality. It's when you undermine another person's sense of what's real and true by questioning them. The term is borrowed from the title of a 1944 movie called Gaslight, in which a husband with, let's say, a criminal bent does everything he can to make his wife question her sanity. He denies things that she sees with her own eyes and manipulates their environment to make her believe that she's a kleptomaniac. His campaign of disinformation is so consistent and so insidious that his wife does end up questioning her own sanity. His end game is to have her institutionalized and get control of her home and her possessions. So that's why gaslighting is used to mean intentionally making someone question their own perceptions or even their sanity. And since this is an extremely disorienting and unpleasant experience to question your own ability to perceive what's true and real, gaslighting is considered to be a form of psychological abuse. It hurts people. And importantly, part of the definition of gaslighting is that it is intentional. It is the intentional practice of making another person question his own perceptions. So, if you've been caught off guard by an accusation of gaslighting, your first and only defense might be to say, "No, I'm not trying to do that to you." But I want to float the idea today that what is popularly called gaslighting is something that many parents do, and it is usually unintentional. So when estranged adult children accuse their parents of gaslighting them, they're using a word that happens to be in vogue, but what they're really saying, I think, is that the parent invalidates the child's perceptions. And parents have been doing this to children for thousands of years. It's nothing new, and it's not evil in intent at all, although it is damaging. When a child says, "Mommy, why are you sad?" and Mommy says, "I'm not sad, I'm just tired." In effect, she's telling the child, "Your perception of reality is incorrect. You thought I looked sad, but I'm not." Or maybe the child goes to Daddy and says, Why did you yell at Mommy?" And Daddy says, "I didn't yell, we were just talking." And the same thing happens. The child thought she heard yelling, but apparently she was mistaken. And you can imagine the many ways and different circumstances in which a parent might invalidate a child's sense of reality in the interest of protecting that child from the very reality that the child is pointing to. I think the idea is to say, "Don't worry, it's not as bad as it seems, everything's okay." And that comes from a good place in the parent. But when you think about what it costs the child, you can see that the child comes to doubt herself fundamentally. She starts to question her ability to know what's real and true. And so, depending on how the parent himself was raised and what kind of emotional intelligence training he's received, if any, he may end up indeed invalidating his children's experience without actually meaning to do them harm and without realizing that what he's doing is causing harm. Parents invalidate their children's experience all the time, in the very same ways that they invalidate their own experience. How often have you asked yourself after a tense exchange with somebody, was I right to be annoyed, or was I being unreasonable? Was that person being rude, or am I just too sensitive? In our culture, one's perceptions and feelings are not considered evidence of reality. And that's a good thing, because different people often see the very same thing in different ways. So the truth of the matter is, in some sense, relative, especially in interpersonal situations. Which is why we need to give room, to give credence to perceptions that differ from our own. When an adult child says, such and such a thing happened constantly in our home when I was growing up, that's her perception of her childhood. If you say, that's not true, then what you're saying is that either your child's memory is faulty, or she recorded false impressions to begin with. So the message you're conveying is, your perception of reality is wrong because I remember it differently. And the way this comes across is invalidating. And it's no mystery why people don't like that. At the very least, what we want to hear is, gosh, I'm sorry to know that you experienced that. It's completely different from how I remember it, but I regret not knowing what you were going through. So if you're being accused of gaslighting your estranged adult child, you can certainly deny that you're intentionally doing so if you're not, but never deny that your responses have inadvertently invalidated your child's thoughts, feelings, or needs. If your child feels invalidated by certain types of responses, that's a fact. That's the reality that you're now being faced with. So try to separate the intention from the act itself. Most of us have, on many occasions, inadvertently invalidated someone else's perceptions just by disagreeing with them. It doesn't make you a criminal if, in fact, you have been guilty of encouraging your child to question himself rather than questioning you. What I recommend if you've been accused of gaslighting your child is to assume that he's being honest about that. Immediately apologize. Let him know that you didn't realize that you were doing that, and maybe ask for examples from your shared history so that you can learn from them. When did your child feel gaslighted? What did you say or do that caused him to think you were trying to pull the wool over his eyes? In each instance, try to remember what was going on inside of you when that happened. Why do you think you might have wanted to deny your child's version of reality? Also, look at when you yourself have been encouraged to question your own perceptions. Who in your life has disagreed with your views of reality? There's a lot of work for most of us to do here if we're up for it. And this is something that you might want some help with. And a local therapist could be an ally in this exercise. If you've been gaslighting your child without realizing it, you are not a terrible parent. You're probably pretty average on that score. What makes for poor parenting is not the fact of making mistakes. It's being unwilling to address mistakes once they're pointed out. So, to address this problem, if you're accused of gaslighting your child, in summary, 1, believe her. 2, apologize. And whatever the response, make sure that you forgive yourself for not knowing the harm that's caused by this totally common parental practice. 3, ask for samples from your own behavior so that you can avoid this in the future. You need to know what not to do, and it might help to have some real-life examples to study. And finally, 4, ask your child to point out the behavior if she ever sees it again so that you don't accidentally add any more bricks to this particular wall. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.